Welcome to POTUS 2016. I'm Brian Lehrer. It has been a week of terror and political fallout, and there was hardly a moment of silence between the gunshots in Paris and the burst of presidential campaign rhetoric, much of it aimed at turning fear to political advantage.
ISIS is making a tremendous amount of money because they have certain oil camps, right? They have certain areas of oil that they took away. They have some in Syria, some in Iraq. I would bomb the out of them. I would just bomb those suckers. And that's right. I'd blow up the pipes. I'd blow up the I'd blow up every single inch. There would be nothing left. And you know what? You'll get Exxon to come in there in 2 months. You ever see these guys, how good they are, the great oil companies? They'll rebuild that sucker brand new. It'll be beautiful. And I'd ring it, and I'd take the oil. And I said, I'll take the oil.
In both tone and content, the starkest contrast to Donald Trump came from President Obama himself, who was visiting Turkey. On how to defeat ISIS, he put down his critics for suggesting things he was doing already. And then he added,
some of them seem to think that if I were just more bellicose in expressing what we're doing, that would make a difference, because that seems to be the only thing that they're doing is talking as if they're tough.
Actually, the candidates were indeed doing something, and it was a task far easier than figuring out how to defeat ISIS without committing ground troops, which the voters don't want. They latched on to the migrant issue, the refugee issue, as reports came in that one of the terrorists in Paris may have smuggled himself in as a Syrian. Senator Marco Rubio said we had no choice but to stop Syrians from taking refuge here at all.
The problem is not the background checks. The problem is we can't background check them. You can't pick up the phone and call Syria. And that's one of the reasons why I've said we won't be able to take more refugees. It's not that we don't want to, it's that we can't. Because there's no way to background check someone that's coming from Syria. Who do you call and do a background check on them?
Agreeing, but with a twist, Governor Jeb Bush suggested we should keep the door open a crack, at least for Christians fleeing for their lives.
There are a lot of Christians in Syria that have no place now. They'll be either executed or imprisoned either by Assad or by ISIS. And I think we should focus our efforts as it relates to refugees for the Christians that are being slaughtered.
Hillary Clinton reacted to that idea, saying that a religious test for refugees was, quote, a new low for the GOP. And President Obama, always ready to help out his party even while abroad, went after Jeb, though not by name.
That's not American. It's not who we are. We don't have religious tests to our compassion.
After that attack from the high ground, Bush backed off, saying that excluding any group, meaning Muslims, was not the answer. But it still was the answer for Senator Ted Cruz, House Speaker Paul Ryan, and scores of GOP governors backing a ban or a pause in Obama's plan to allow in 10,000 Syrians. Mike Huckabee warned pro-migration Democrats to, in his words, wake up and smell the falafel. However, some Christian relief groups, like the Evangelical World Relief, have broken with the GOP on this issue. And let's not leave out Dr. Ben Carson, who has looked uncomfortable talking about foreign affairs at all. But can he learn? Not according to Dwayne Clarridge, a top advisor to Carson. Quote, nobody has been able to sit down with him and have him get one iota of intelligence information about the Middle East, unquote. Now, after that quote, which was published in the New York Times, I think Dwayne will be looking for a new job soon, don't you? With our guests, we will delve deeper into the political, security, and foreign policy implications of Paris. First, though, yes, time for the horse race. To begin, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal has dropped out. Not my time, he said. The conservative governor was low in the polls and money. And the effect of the Paris attacks? Many thought that would turn the tide back toward establishment GOP candidates like Rubio and Bush. But Paris has apparently bolstered Trump. A November 16th and 17th Reuters Ipsos survey, that's Monday and Tuesday, named Trump and Clinton as the top two candidates on terrorism. So for now, it appears that the Donald has reversed a downhill trend that started in October and is putting a little more distance between himself and Ben Carson. In a morning consult poll of registered voters conducted in the days around the Paris attacks, Trump now leads Carson 38% to 19% in the overall race for the GOP nomination. Rubio, Cruz, and Bush run neck and neck in the second tier. A similar Trump trend is also reflected in the latest New Hampshire primary poll from Boston radio station WBUR. In the Granite State, Trump now leads Carson 23% to 13% among likely voters, a dramatic turnaround from just 2 weeks ago when WBUR polling had Trump leading Carson by just 2 points. But opinion polls with a limited sample of respondents only go so far in telling the complete story. The Microsoft research project PredictWise factors in more than just polling. They also factor in the prediction and betting markets to capture crowd wisdom surrounding the race. According to the project, Marco Rubio dominates the Republican primary race with a 45% chance of nomination. Donald Trump's chances are less than half that at 20%, while Ted Cruz's 13% and Jeb Bush's 11% trail even further behind. Here you see Ben Carson in fifth place, not at all looking like a favorite to win the nomination, according to those markets. And market prognosticators also watch political endorsements, which have historically been a good indicator of the eventual party choice. Lately, for Republicans, that race has increasingly been between Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. Both candidates have shown endorsement upticks in recent weeks, while the overall trend in Jeb Bush backers shows a decline. Currently, Jeb Bush is still out front, though, with 28 members of Congress. Marco Rubio sits in second place with 13, while Rand Paul and Ted Cruz have 11 and 10 members, respectively. It's still early, however, and the movement is likely to be fast and furious as we get near the actual primary voting. We will keep you updated as it happens. On the Democratic side, the Clinton juggernaut continues. Hillary's massive endorsement tally of 157 members of Congress now smothers the 2 representatives endorsing runner-up Bernie Sanders and the 1 rep plugging for Martin O'Malley. With 12 governors also endorsing the Democratic frontrunner, Hillary Clinton is the most establishment-approved candidate heading into the Iowa caucuses on record. Now to our guests. Joining us first, Mideast expert Gideon Rose, editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, published by the Council on Foreign Relations. Rose is author of How Wars End. Thank you for coming back on the program.
Thank you, Brian.
First, Jeb Bush. Is he trying to claw his way back to relevance by being a little more outrageous, a little holier than thou among this evangelical field by calling for Christians to be singled out for refugee status?
Yeah, but see, he can't do it. You can't fake it. They want real anger this year, not fake anger. They want real outrageousness, not fake stuff. Elvis Costello had a song whose chorus was, "I used to be disgusted, now I'm just amused." I think the opposite is true here. I used to be amused by this race, now I'm just disgusted. Although actually I have to say that Trump, I still find amusing. I mean, Trump is funnier on the campaign trail than he was on Saturday Night Live. But the response to this bombing and these attacks, the shootings in Paris, has been so extreme and so completely divorced from reality. Foreign policy is now starting to give fiscal policy a run for its money in the magical thinking department. Well, and that's saying something.
About Trump, one specific thing, the bomb the expletive out of clip that we played, how does that fit with what he got a lot of attention for saying just a few weeks ago, which was that we should let Putin fight ISIS in Syria, which Putin seems interested in doing, because let the Russians get bogged down in that quagmire instead of us?
First of all, trying to lump what he has together in some consistent foreign policy platform is an absurd task you shouldn't even try. These are all little bits and pieces here that he's saying. There's no coherent theory or strategy behind them. That said, there isn't as much of a divergence as you might think, because his previous comment could have been summed up as saying, let the Russians bombed the crap out of them, and now he's saying we should bomb the crap out of them. What's common there is the bombing the crap part and not getting involved on the ground, which he knows his people don't want to do.
Do you get the sense that there is any serious movement, either among the expert class who you're in touch with at the Council on Foreign Relations and Foreign Affairs magazine, or in this candidate field, including Hillary Clinton, who hasn't really gone on the record much as to what exactly we should do post-Paris, any more appetite than there was for actually getting ground troops in?
I don't think there's any appetite for getting ground troops in. The only person who's actually mentioned that, I believe, is Lindsey Graham, who's not really a factor. And the others are talking tough, but not actually proposing anything significant. In the movie A Few Good Men, the Demi Moore character is playing a lawyer in court and who objects, and the judge overrules her objection. And she says, "But I strongly object." And her fellow lawyer on her defense team sort of looks at her and says, "Really? Is that how it works? You strongly object?" What we're seeing is people bidding them up their outrage about ISIS. I strongly object to ISIS. But they don't actually have any new or significant plans. And the ones they do have, like the refugee stuff, have nothing to do with the actual threats that are there.
And I think Speaker of the House Paul Ryan has called on President Obama to come up with a new plan by February, which is a way of punting and saying, we don't have to do this. The Republican candidates don't have to do this. You, Mr. President, have to do something to put on the line so we can shoot it down.
And Congress hasn't even done the authorization of force. I mean, it's
for what we already are doing.
Right.
Over there.
This is not a serious policy discussion. And, you know, to the extent that the media buys in by treating it as one, it may be doing a sort of disservice to the public at large, who deserve to be told that just as the tax plans don't add up, so the foreign policy remedies don't add up. And at this point, it's just emotion.
What would a serious foreign policy discussion look like that might be more Democratic on the one side and more Republican on the other side, but that really was a serious conversation?
Okay, well, the first thing is it starts from facts about what actually happened. You know, it's funny. I was asked to do some media starting from Friday night on, as soon as the attacks happened. If you're a terrorist expert, you've been on TV, you get asked. And I said no, because you can't really add discussion until you actually know what happened. And we didn't know what happened, so I didn't do it. And then I was watching TV with my son, and we were watching these other mooks up there babbling on with one crazy theory after another. And I said, should I have done this? Because I would have been better than these guys. And he said, no, because you still didn't have anything interesting to say. And I said, that's true. That's why I didn't do it. So the first thing is the real discussion starts from what do we know? And the interesting question here is how much of this was direct controlled from Syria by ISIS Central Command, as it were, as opposed to the local people. The second thing is how much of the attack represented a dramatic shift in strategy by ISIS. And the third thing is how much of this was essentially a product of the weak intelligence and homeland security policies on the European side. Now, the first thing I would say is that it does seem that the real problems here were homeland security problems and intelligence sharing problems within Europe, which are not ones that we necessarily have here in the United States. So there's no necessary assumption that because it happened there, it'll immediately happen here. The second thing, though, is it does seem to represent a shift in tactics by ISIS to go more global than they have been. If you look at the most successful terrorist groups in recent decades, they've been ones like Hamas and Hezbollah, which have actually kept their focus very limited, building things on the ground and being localized so as not to provoke a giant balancing response. The al-Qaeda types that take on the world end up getting crushed. ISIS had been in the former category until recently. It now seems like they're moving into the latter category, which holds real risks for them as well as potential opportunities. So the question becomes, not only can you improve intelligence and homeland security, but is there something you can do in Syria and Iraq, either on the ground or by stepped-up bombing? The answer is, it seems maybe yes, a few things here and there, but not dramatic. They're essentially marginal improvements. Fred Kaplan of Slate did a good plan for sort of what you might think of as a hawkish existing policy plus strategy. But it's not rocket science, and it's not going to change the outcome dramatically.
All right. You want evidence before commentating? We're going to bring on some additional evidence. Stay right here. time for Evidence-Based Politics, where we ask a scholar to pour cold, hard facts over the overheated campaign rhetoric. Much of that rhetoric right now assumes the U.S. is in danger, just like Paris. But is it the same? The suspected mastermind in the Paris attacks is from Belgium. The other confirmed suspects are believed to be European nationals, too. In Europe, it's no longer a picture of ISIS sympathizers heading to Syria to join the fight. Instead, it looks more like radicalized Europeans creating terror at home. But is the picture the same here in the USA? New research on 68 cases against alleged ISIS supporters in U.S. federal courts gives us some answers. To explain her findings, Karen Greenberg joins us. She is director of the Center on National Security at the Fordham University School of Law. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And let's put a graphic up right away from your Fordham study. And this year, you document about 7 arrests a month nationwide. We can see the increase in this month-by-month graphic over time. So starting, I guess right in about January, it started to go up pretty dramatically. Are these ISIS arrests being made primarily in certain geographic areas?
Actually, they're nationwide. There are investigations in all 50 states, according to the director of the FBI. But there's been maybe 15 states that have been implicated, but they're north, south, east, and west.
What actual crime are these suspects usually charged with?
Usually they're charged with material support, which is a very broad charge that can be anything from providing yourself to providing money to providing material by way of guns or something else.
Out of 68 people arrested for being ISIS plotters since last year, you count about 20 accused of plotting to attack in the United States, the rest accused of planning to join ISIS abroad. But I think you see the rate arrested for domestic plots increasing over time. Is that right?
Actually, that was true up until what happened was in the initial cases, the initial 20 to 30 cases, they were mostly about either people trying to facilitate foreign fighters or people who wanted to be foreign fighters. Then over the course of the late spring, summer, there were a whole bunch of domestic plotting cases. And now the cases, which are very few in number now, are returning to the foreign fighter arrests.
You write that the accused are diverse and difficult to profile, but let's see a little of what we do know, and we're going to put up another of your graphs here. 81% are U.S. citizens, 85% are male, 85% have no previous convictions. At least a third are converts to Islam as opposed to raised in the religion. Average age, about 25. 4% are refugees. And there's the hot button stat for this week's news with the debate over closing the borders to Syrian refugees escaping ISIS because there might be infiltrators from ISIS among them. Who are these refugees who've actually been charged with ISIS-related crimes in the United States, and where are they from?
They're not from the Middle East. They're from Bosnia. They're from Sudan. They're from places you might not have expected. In fact, of these ISIS cases, very few people are from the Middle East, ethnically and by background. And so that's one of the interesting statistics. So when you raise the refugee flag and what it will mean, in terms of the cases that have already come down the pike, it doesn't mean very much.
By the way, 4% of 68 total cases, that's like 3 people.
It's 3 cases.
Yeah. And the U.S. citizens, do they tend to be of Arab or any other descent?
No, not necessarily. They're all over the globe. Some of them are East European, some of them are West European, some of them are from the Middle East, some of them are, we don't know where they're from. A number of them are just Catholics born in the United States. I mean, it's a very interesting, a third of them are converts. That's a good percentage of them, much more than we saw in the 500 al-Qaeda-related cases from 9/11 until now. So
if they're converts, this third or more, does that indicate that ISIS, which is famous for being very adept at social media, is finding people and converting them to Islam in the first place, or are they just finding Muslims and radicalizing them?
No, they are finding young individuals, very young individuals. I would say that those who get most seriously involved in wanting to go abroad are between 20 and 24, and sometimes younger. They are finding young individuals who are looking for a cause, who are isolated, who are alienated, who are male and female, and they're ringing a bell in these children's, and they're mostly children, in their minds, and they are attracting them. and it seems like the conversion often follows that, and sometimes there's an inner conversion, Muslims who take a different turn inside the religion itself.
So it's like a gap year for jihadis?
What do you mean?
Well, in the sense that you have young people who are idealistic, who are looking for adventure, who are going abroad, who are attracted to something new and different and getting out of their pre-existing
Okay,
life.
let me tell you why it's not a gap year. Very interesting. When you look at what these kids say and what's alleged in the complaints, but also letters they've written their parents and other things, they do not want to come back. This is not a gap year. This is not let me experiment. This is I want to join the caliphate. I want to live in a country which I can serve. I want to identify with this cause. This is where I see my future. And they write these goodbye letters in some cases to their parents, etc.
Would it have been like cults back in the 70s and 80s?
There is definitely a cult feeling to some of this, and there's no getting around that. I think that's a very good analogy, yes.
Let me put up another of your graphics, and maybe you can explain to us what this means, what these distinctions are. Foreign fighters, 53%. Facilitators, what's a facilitator? 21%. And domestic plotters, 26%. What does facilitator mean here?
So facilitator is somebody who is not planning to go abroad, as far as law enforcement has alleged, but who has either tried to recruit this individual personally or has provided the money, the plane ticket, the wherewithal, just to show these are the steps you can take to go abroad. Interestingly enough, the foreign fighters are older than the rest. They tend to be people
Those
above...
are the Americans who want to go to Syria, right?
Well,
Does
the
that
foreign,
mean?
no, okay. The facilitators, I think that's what I meant to say.
Yes.
The facilitators are older than the rest.
Right.
They tend to be 30 and above.
Okay.
The foreign fighters are the ones who want to go abroad. Of course, most of them don't make it, and most of them have been arrested either here or there on the way, so they're not getting abroad in these cases. And the domestic plotters are those who have identified targets in the United States who law enforcement believes are on their way to wanting to plot against an American target.
And that quarter or so who are the domestic plotters, that's a quarter out of just 68 people, but that's 68 people.
Yeah.
Have they been accused of planning anything like what we just saw in Paris?
No, they haven't gotten that far. There's no plan that's that specific that's come up in one of these. That doesn't mean law enforcement doesn't have some scenario that they haven't shared in any kind of criminal complaint or indictment. Remember that none of these cases have gone to trial. And as a result, some of them are in their early stages. A number of them have already pled out. There have been 18 convictions. But we don't get the full story when they don't go to trial. And so we don't know.
As you look at this, do you say we're actually on top of this because there are a lot of arrests and very few incidents? Or do you say, oh my God, no, there's a giant iceberg submerged there that we haven't yet attacked?
No, I think very much the first thing you said, which is that compared to the numbers in Europe, and you referred to what was different about Europe and here, these are very low numbers, even though they say they have hundreds of investigations going on across the country. These are also kids who might not really have the capacity to do anything. And when you read through the materials, you're sort of saying, where's the there? And in the way law enforcement has handled this so far, particularly with the younger ones that want to go abroad, or even some of the younger ones that are plotters, there's been a tremendous leniency in how they've charged them and thus in the sentences they've gotten.
So in our remaining 2 minutes or so, I wonder how each of you thinks that the actual data on ISIS plotters in the United States, at least those who have been arrested, should inform the presidential race. Karen?
I think that the presidential race should be informed by the fact that law enforcement is immensely attentive to any kind of terrorist threat. And in looking at these cases where there's very little going on of a serious threat in these particular cases, there's a sense that they've done their job and that maybe we need to turn our attention to things outside of law enforcement.
And Gideon?
From taxes to TPP to any other issue, there's almost no relation of empirics to the way these issues play out in the presidential campaign, so I don't see why terrorism should be any different.
But if it was...
If it was, you'd concentrate on real-world issues such as the tracking of and intelligence sharing on suspects in Europe and greater international cooperation, and some really interesting discussions about what our broader Syrian policy should be. Is it worth letting Assad off the hook in order to get Putin's support for going after ISIS? Or do you want to say, no, we want to keep the Russians out and keep our opposition to Putin? And what, if anything, can you do with attacking a few more targets in Syria? There are no good answers. There's no free lunch. But there are real choices you could make on one or the other set of policies.
All right. Well, we will see if the actual presidential campaign debate reflects reality or continues to live in its own sphere. Thank you both very much for joining us. And that is POTUS 2016 for today. We meet each week at this hour, calling the presidential horse race and asking researchers to pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.